All right. So, well, I'm late this week. So, next week we will start taking an offering for Sunday school. Sean asked for each Sunday school class to raise money to help pay for a night of camp meeting. No, a night of camp meeting. So that would be between now and the end of September. We need to raise, by taking offerings, $1,500. That's not a lot, but he wants each class to sponsor a night of camp meeting. So that's, yeah. So Lita's got to do it. We got to do it. Somebody else is doing it too. I'm not sure whom, but I think the Wednesday night kids are going to sponsor a night as well. So, anyways, so we'll pick that up next week. We'll start that. Rosie, you can do that next. Oh, you will be here. Huh. Go figure. Oh well. I'll leave that in Jesse's capable hands. He's shaking his head. All right. We're talking about the covenant. Who's got a Bible and wants to read for me today, other than Brad? Oh, Sue. Okay. Brad, Genesis chapter 9, verses 11 through 13. And then Sue, Genesis chapter 15 and verse 18. Genesis 15 and 18. Yeah, we're diving into the Old Testament. This is really good. It helps us understand our relationship with God. 15 and verse 18. Yeah. No, not through 18, just 15, 18. Yeah. Read it when you got it. You got it? Yeah, go ahead and read it. Yeah. No, that's okay.
On the day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your descendants I have given this land, from the rivers of Egypt as far as the great river, the river Euphrates.
Awesome. Now, I meant to get a picture of that so you can understand how great an area that is. When God made the covenant with Abraham, he gave him all from the Nile to the Euphrates. And I just want to say today, had Israel kept the covenant with God, they would be richer than you can imagine, because that's where all the oil is, between Euphrates, which runs through the middle of Iraq, to the Nile, which runs through the middle of Egypt. They would have that entire, in Syria, they would have it all. If you obey, just obedience makes a difference. All right. Can you read, Brad?
This is 9 through 13.
11 through 13.
And I establish my covenant with you, and all flesh shall never again be cut off by the water of the flood. Neither shall there again be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant which I am making between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all successive generations. I set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of a covenant between me and you.
God talks to Noah, and in 3 verses, he uses the word covenant 3 times. I've got a covenant. I'm making a covenant with you. Now, in Old Testament times, covenants were various types. Sometimes they were one-sided covenants. Sometimes they were two-sided. You do this, I'll do this. Various covenants. Now, the word covenant, and we'll touch that briefly, means to cut. To cut. So in a covenant, something is cut. generally animals are cut in half. Okay? They get a really sharp blade, and they start at the top of the head, and they cut it all the way through to the end, and then they cut multiple animals. They lay the halves on the sides of the road, and the blood in between, and the covenant partners walk through the blood. And the concept is, if I break the covenant, may God do to me what we did to these animals. That's how serious the covenant was. So as we dive into this and look at this, the covenant, understand the covenant is broken right now. Yeah. It doesn't work at all. Well, go figure. I go over this last night, everything worked fine. I go with today, doesn't work for nothing. I know, what in the world? Yeah. There we go. As you walk through it, you understand its place in history. It's going to cause hundreds of years of Bible verses to come alive. Once you understand how the covenant works, it's a foundation for everything else you might believe. Your whole understanding of salvation, holiness, healing, and worship are all based on the covenant. The covenant. The study of the covenant is amazing. When I first found something on the covenant, I said, I've never heard or seen anything like this ever before. I've shared some books with folks. Mike has read some of it. Gil has read some of it. This covenant thing is serious. It's in the Bible, but it's not spelled out exactly right. You know what I'm saying? You find pieces of it here and there. The word covenant in the Hebrew form used 300 times in the Bible, and it means to cut. So what's a covenant ceremony? In the simplest form, it's an all-encompassing agreement between two parties with clearly outlined perimeters and promises. It's an agreement between two people, okay? When you get married, a marriage forms a covenant between two people. And here's the perimeters. And this is how it works. And God says marriage is not a contract. Rick, it's a covenant. Okay? We treat marriage like a contract today. But God says it's not a contract, it's a covenant. Something gets cut in a marriage. We'll get into that a little later. It's a mutual understanding between two people who bind themselves together with specific obligations. You say, what's the big deal? Why would I be so excited to share this concept with you? Well, God looked down on planet Earth and he saw the destruction and destitution of humanity, and it broke his heart. It broke his heart. He never designed his creation to be in such chaos. And as he looked down from heaven to earth, he observed what the ancient people in Abraham's time, 2,000 years before Christ, participated in covenant-making ceremonies. God looked down and he saw how this had happened. Now, in the second book in the series, this portion, I'm going to cover it for 2 weeks, and it gets us through the covenant process. And then the second book, and I gave a copy to Cecil today, and the reason I gave him a copy is because I'm going to give him a lesson. He's going to do it. He's going to have some fun. He's going to love it. It's going to be great. All right? But this covenant-making ceremony, there is so much to it. There are 9 steps that are given in the covenant-making ceremony. We're going to go through each step, and we'll as we look at it and we read over it, it'll kind of start making sense in your head. You're like, I never saw that before. But when we get to it, you'll see it and you'll say, that's really cool. God, listen, and this was God's idea. This was God's idea. The covenant, when it kicked in back in the day, and they started with this covenant thing, people were already doing this for thousands of years. I've got a book at home by a guy named H. Clay Trumbull. It's from the 1800s. The guy wrote this book. He had traveled through Africa, and he saw everywhere that people existed, they were doing this covenant-making process in the 1800s. The same thing. And even today, there are offshoots of the covenant process that you'll see in church. You say, what do you mean? When you go up and shake somebody's hand, it's part of the covenant process. All these things, it all relates back to a biblical thing. So God sets up this thing. Now, they did this with the full knowledge that once having committed themselves to each other, everything they had belonged to each other. They intentionally would release their individual identities in order to have a merged identity. Okay? So the person entering into the covenant with someone else, say Mike and I would enter into this covenant together, and all of my assets become Mike's assets. And all of Mike's assets become my assets. And so what Mike has that I don't have, I have now. And what I have that Mike doesn't have, Mike has now. And as we join together in a covenant, the kids become part of the covenant. The family is part of the covenant. All your possessions are part of the covenant. And John's sitting back there thinking, I don't want to be in a covenant with anybody. No, you're not getting my cars. It's not much. And John's thinking that right now. No, you can't have it, Scotty. Come on. There you go. Hey, liabilities too. You share liabilities. We got married. We shared liabilities. Rosie brought to the relationship, you brought some debt, didn't you? Yeah. Rosie brought a brain to the relationship. Well, bless her heart. Thanks, Bill.
At least one of you have one.
Somebody has to have one. I would give you that. Whatever it takes is what I say. Yes, sir.
Something you need to learn going into this study is that there's a design behind everything.
Yes. Yes.
You gave specific instructions to everybody. There was no guessing. You have to think on your own. Say, I quit the military.
Yeah.
I'm a squad leader, and I tell the guys in my squad that whatever you think you can do is that you have to think beyond what they expect you to do.
Right.
So you didn't say, hey, I want you to go be a tabernacle. You gave specific
Here's how to do it.
on how to do it.
Exactly.
Like this covenant, we talked about sacrifice covenant. He told me exactly this is what you have to do. Don't say, hey, well, I want you to sacrifice a sheep, and you figure it out. You get specific instructions, and that's from the beginning of time.
Yeah.
He was designing deciding to make man. He said, we know what the flaws are going to be.
Yeah.
We have to know here's the way out.
Right.
And here's the way out. We have to make a sacrifice that covers the sin until you go and make the ultimate sacrifice.
Exactly.
So we got to approach this whole idea that he's going to give us exactly the specific instructions we need
Right.
to make it work and do it right.
And he tells us exactly how this covenant works. And he told them in the Old Testament. Yeah, I mean, he told Adam and Eve when sin took place. What happened? Well, God killed an animal. for a sacrifice to make skins for these folks. I mean, he just didn't make the skins. The skins came from somewhere. God killed an animal to two people who had never seen death before. Now, I want you to think about this for a while. This will bake your brain. Adam and Eve have never seen death, and God introduces them to death, saying something has to die when there's sin involved. And an innocent animal dies to cover the sins of Adam and Eve. And I mean, it blows my mind to think about it now, Cecil. Something has to die. Thank God Jesus was the something for me. God says to himself, I'm going to bind myself to them, and I ask them to bind themselves to me, and thereby everything I have will belong to them. All the blessings in heaven is going to be theirs, and I'm going to have a covenant-making ceremony with humanity. So God looks across the planet for a person, one person that'd be capable of hearing from God and obeying him so he can establish his covenant relation, and he found a guy named Abram. If you remember in Genesis, and God finds Abram, or as we call him, he got his name changed to Abraham, and God says, this is the way I'm going to get in. I found my entry point. He began to talk with Abram, and the first message was kind of strange. He says, leave where you live and go to a new site. I'm going to give you some land. You leave here, you go to where I send you, I've got something for you there. Now, that took some serious faith on Abraham's part. I'll say that. And then Abraham was probably confused, but he didn't give up. And he says, I'm going to enter into a relationship with you. And Abraham said, what kind? And God says, the covenant. And he says, the covenant? And God said, yeah. But God, when people are in a covenant, that means everything they have belongs to each other. Are you saying that you are going to enter into a relationship with me? And God's like, yes. And the covenant came about. Now, from this conversation, the most profound thing happened. For the covenant that God made was not with just Abraham, but all of his spiritual descendants. That includes us. The primitive rite of blood covenanting was well known among the lands of the Bible at the time of the writing of the Bible. Now, one of the things that they did in the covenant process, Gil, was they would cut their wrist and mix blood together. You ever seen that? Huh? You ever seen that movie, The Outlaw Josey Wales? And the Indian chief and him, they sat on their horses, and they take the knife and slice their palm of their hands and put their hands together, and the blood mingles. And you say, why did they do that? It's part of the covenant process. See, it wasn't just Christians that did it. It wasn't just Old Testament believers. This is like a worldwide thing. People do this all over the world. And you say, well, you don't see as much now. Yeah, but the remnants of what happened back then, they still remain today. Remnants are still here. And let me toss this in for good measure. In the Bible, you don't find it listed out step by step by step by step. You say, why is that? Because we live in a Western world, and this was an Eastern world. The Eastern world, everybody knew it. We're here in the Western world, and we've never heard of it. So, Brad, when I saw it for the first time, I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this is crazy. This is so, I had never heard of it, John. I never heard of this at all. And I started reading about it, and I read more and more. Then I started buying more books about it. And that H. Clay Trumbull dude, you can find repeats of his books. Actually, you can download PDFs online for free from Google. But he wrote a book about that. He wrote a book about the threshold covenant, the threshold of your house. I mean, I remember as a kid, they always said, don't step on the threshold. And he said, why don't you step on the threshold? And there are some reasons, but the main reason is because in the old days, when they offered a sacrifice, they would kill it at the threshold, and the blood would run down the street in front of the threshold of the houses. And so you didn't step on the threshold, you stepped over the threshold. And when you stepped over it, remember when they left Egypt and they dipped the hyssop in the blood, and they would strike the lintel and the two doorposts, but they didn't strike the threshold. You had to step over the blood to get into the house. So when you went in the house, you were going through the blood. This is, people, they hear it, it's like, where did you get that? So I'm giving these books out, telling you, buy these books. You'll learn something here. But, so all these things, and they all add up. We'll talk about David and Jonathan. They entered into a covenant, and then David, later in life, wants to do something for Jonathan's son, not for the son's benefit, but because of his dad. I want to help somebody for Jonathan's sake. You read that, I swear, every time I read that story, I sit and cry, because he's not doing it for the offspring, he's doing it for Jonathan. That's the person he had a covenant relationship with. The primitive right, it was well known at the time of the writing of the Bible. So we don't look the Bible for specific explanations of the right, but there's a lot of references to it. On the other hand, we find an explanation of the biblical illustrations of the primitive right in the understanding of the right we gain from outside sources. In this way, we're able to see in the Bible much that otherwise would be lost sight of. The Bible doesn't need to give a thorough explanation of the covenant, because the people in that time understood it. We have got a disadvantage. We don't see it. We don't understand it. We read the Bible as Westerners, not Easterners. And we miss the point. We don't have a covenant-making ceremony in our culture, with the exception of a wedding ceremony. So we have no way to relate to this unusual thing. It's so weird to us. Part of the marriage covenant, when somebody gets married, what's the last thing they do after they eat dinner? What do the bride and groom do to each other? They feed cake. You smash cake in somebody's face, yeah. From the covenant ceremony, John, honestly, there's a portion of the covenant ceremony when you feed the other person. And that's this marriage thing. It comes from an ancient thing. So I want you to see that. So God demonstrates these things for us. The covenant is a word that describes God's relationship with us. All right? From the creation of the world, God used a unique pattern, a cultural event referred to as the covenant. Through this, he outlines specific requirements, spectacular promises, and tells us how he wants us to respond to him. And he gives us promises of what he's going to do for us. Sometime after God called Abraham, they were talking with each other. God reminded Abram of the original promise of the land. And Abram asked how he could be certain that God would come through in his part of the deal. And God said, get a heifer. And when Abram heard God say, get the heifer, immediately he knew what God was saying. Why? Because it was common in that day. Somebody told me, get a heifer today. I would think that they're getting married to, he's getting married to a fat woman. I don't know. Come on. What's that? Get ready to have dinner. Yeah. Genesis 15, 7 through 12. And he said unto him, I am the Lord that brought thee out of Ur of the Chaldees to give thee this land to inherit it. And he said, Lord God, whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it? And he said unto him, take me an heifer of 3 years old, and a she-goat of 3 years old, and a ram of 3 years old, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he took unto him all these, and divided them in the midst, and laid each piece one against the other, but the birds divided he not. And when the fowls came down upon the carcasses, Abram drove them away, and the sun was going down, and a deep sleep fell on Abram. And lo, a great horror of darkness fell upon him. And it came to pass, when the sun went down, it was dark, and behold, a smoking furnace and a burning lamp passed between those pieces. In the same day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates. Now, here's what I want you to think about. Did this covenant ever end? No. It's one-sided. He didn't say, if you do these things for me, I'll give this to you. No, it was a straight, I'm going to give these to you. And because Abraham got ahead of God, okay, he got ahead of God and said, okay, God, Ishmael, he'll be my son. And God said, no, I've called Isaac. Isaac is going to be your seed, and he's going to be the one. But Ishmael, the sons of Ishmael, are the Muslims today. Okay? And the sons of Isaac are the Jews. So who controls that entire area? Abraham's family.
Yeah.
The Muslims hate the Jews. The Jews can't stand the Muslims. But guess who owns all that property? Abraham's progeny. God made the covenant with Abraham. I'm going to do this for you. This is what I will do for you. And because of Abraham saying to God, I believe, and he took the animals and he cut them in half, you'll notice it said that Abraham spent his time driving the birds off. The birds were coming down to eat the carcasses. And he's like, no. So he drove them all the way until the sun went down. When the sun went down, the birds couldn't see the carcasses anymore. Abraham fell asleep. And in his vision, he saw a smoking furnace and a pot going between it. Now here's what this means. Generally speaking, when that took place, the covenant partners would walk between the pieces of flesh. And as they walked in it, they would hold hands and they'd do a figure eight in the blood. You say, what do you mean? It's infinity. Okay? This will never end. We're saying as covenant partners, this is never going to end. This is forever. But when it happened to Abraham, the only person that actually walked through the blood was God. So this covenant that he made, John, you got to get this. The covenant that he made was a one-sided covenant. God says, I promise I'm going to do this. And let me tell you, God never breaks his promise. He always keeps his promise. And that's what happened here, okay? Under thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. In these scriptures, God gave Abram some unusual instructions. Abraham had left Ur the Chaldeans, his home country, to follow God. God promised him real estate. And Abraham was expected. He said, I'm here, and I'm ready for all you promised me. When God says, get a heifer, the reply was no surprise to Abraham. Sacrificing a heifer was the language of contracts in those days. And with those words, Abram knew he was about to make a contract, a covenant contract with God. Any questions? I'm halfway through. I am so excited. I could spend another 5 hours on this just today because this is so exciting to me. Go ahead. What you saying? Yeah.
In the wedding vow, you set up the marriage vow. What did you have to do? You had to creed.
Yes.
Going on there.
Yep.
Versus physical necessarily. It was something you had to decide to cut out. That's how my mother and father.
Right.
And enter into the covenant with your spouse.
Sure.
So it's always taught as a covenant that requires the covenant.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
They had the Old Testament with Moses and things, and they started there. And so they talked about them circumcised Philistines.
Yeah.
There's always cutting involved there. Are you prepared to cut some things out of your life and into more,
Yeah.
a greater covenant with God?
Exactly. That really is the point. There's going to be a cutting that takes place. There's going to be a scar that takes place. Listen, if you cut enough times your arm, you get a scar. Actually, I'll tell you what they did, and I know I'm jumping ahead of myself, but what they would do is, to make sure the scar was visible, they would take ashes from a fire and they would rub it on that mark on the arm because it would create a scar there. Now, if you'll read the stuff by H. Clay Trumbull, he talks about a Dr. Stanley that is trying to reach out to the tribes in Africa. And as he's trying to reach out to tribes in Africa, he said every time he comes to a chief of a tribe, he would cut a covenant with them. And he would cut his arm. They said in Bible times, they considered the hand all the way up to about here on the arm. So this was the palm, considered the palm of the hand, all the way up to here. And they would cut and cut and cut and cut. And each time they would cut, they would rub in the ashes and it would create a scar. So, you know how when you see somebody today and you want to say hi, you wave. Well, waving is an Old Testament thing. And when you're waving, you're showing the covenant. You're showing you've got a covenant partner. Okay? As you're waving, people see the covenant partner. And they said, Dr. Stanley said he had cut covenant so many times with so many chiefs that when he raised his arm and put his shirt down, said people would bow in his presence. In other words, saying, I'm not going to work with you because you have more friends than I do, and they will whip me. So that's where this is going. That's where it came from. I want you to see that. Like I said, I've read a lot about it. I love it. It's the greatest thing in the world. Mike.
One thing before we close that
Yeah.
stuck out to me was reading, and then you mentioned that raised the eastern world and the western world.
Yeah.
When this was raised, was obviously, some of it's hard for us to understand. What have I lost over?
Yeah. Right.
Like, and that's what started making me think when I read this, is like trying to reflect on how much stuff have I lost over reading and studying just because I didn't truly understand.
Right.
And so like, then all this like, I went down rabbit holes. Like, it's just,
Exactly.
you know.
Yeah.
This is good stuff.
It's good. Yeah. All right.
Just like when we went to Israel,
Yes, ma'am.
you know, and we saw how they lived and things they did, and you know how we talk about a manger, and I know we were just walking out in the middle of nowhere. I forget where we're at. We're walking up some hill with the guide, and I pointed at that rock that was pretty interesting. It was a rectangle rock and had the inside hewn out of it. And I said something, oh, that's a pole looking rock, and the guy said that's a manger, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. You know, we all think of the wood manger, but that was an actual
Yeah.
manger. That's where they fed the animals or watered the animals, and you know, it just kind of like, I don't know, it just kind of like stands out. It makes
Oh, yeah.
a little bit more sense. And then you realize, well, there really aren't very many trees around here too, so it could be wood, everything.
They don't have wood. They can't build wood.
You start seeing that, and it's
Yeah.
making more sense. Their culture versus ours.
Yeah.
That's what one of the things that is funny when I first learned about it. They don't have a lot of wood or anything, so the part of it are actually with stone,
Yeah.
not wood.
Yeah.
The stable was actually in the rock.
Yeah.
It wasn't in a wooden structure. The anchor obviously was a carved out rock.
Yeah.
Yeah, they took us into a stable,
Yeah.
and it's just like a cave, what we would consider a cave, but it's all rock
Yeah.
cave that they, you know,
Exactly. Well, yeah.
What kind of sacrifices they had to make with it, but all the battles they had to go through, really, God thankfully put us in a country where we didn't have to face anything. We were
Right.
always protected. We always had an army to protect. We always had and they lived it.
Right.
Walked through it. So they were understanding of that country, his Lord. So they probably did.
Sure. Yeah. With a nail gun. With a nail gun. I get it. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Sure. Yeah. Sure. Sure. Right.
That's a change that we're cutting away that part of our
Right.
government and going to accept this new government. Hopefully it's
Hopefully it's better. Yeah. John, will you dismiss us in a word of prayer, buddy? Thanks, buddy. Amen.